Welcome, everybody, to the SIG Network meeting for Thursday, March 17th, 2022. Tim, do you want to do triage?
Yes, let's share a window. Yes.
Yep, looks good.
All right. So we have, we did a lot of filtering beforehand, so thank you. We have Dan Winship's treatise on external versus internal. It's actually a thrilling read. And I didn't get all the way through it actually in the prep time. This is the argument that we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago about whether traffic to the same node on a node port or an LBIP is internal or external. Dan makes a proposal, but I haven't had a chance to really convince myself that it is the right proposal. It's either weird and awkward or consistent and sort of broken in this corner case. There doesn't seem to be a much better answer. So I'm leaving this in open. Actually, I'm going to remove the triage flag from it because it is clear that it needs to be done. This is where we should center the discussion. There's a second issue open that's actually open for a very long time, which seems to be the same issue. So I will also leave this here. But yes, they seem to be the same issue.
Are they at least linked to each other in GitHub?
There's a reference from one to the other.
Okay,
yes.
That's all I want. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. I missed that.
So
okay.
For the record, and you can see in the one that I filed, I updated the fixing internal traffic policy PR, and it is now marked as fixing this issue because it implements the plan that I suggested here.
Okay.
And
all
that
right.
is blocking other 124 work, so you should review it.
I will. Next was about graceful termination and TCP versus SCTP versus UDP, which I see is on the agenda for today.
Yeah, because there was a lot of good comments. I reached out to people that is working with this in production, and the last comment I was checking the GitHub of the person, and he's writing some shutdown process for SCTP in the IETF. So I think that we have good feedback here.
Okay, so we're going to discuss that in a few minutes. So I won't close this yet, or I mean, I'm not going to close it. It's not really a bug report, and it's not really a proposal yet either. So we got to figure out whether this is a bug report or what we're going to do with this. The last one that was needed attention today was this friend who was a couple of months old. Yeah. And it's not clear to me still what's going on here. This is the case of, it wasn't clear whether they're trying to do keep cuddle logs and they're not getting a connection all the way through, but only if they're using V6. There were some follow-up questions 2 weeks ago that the original poster actually did answer and I didn't get it back to. So I guess this one's on me. I'll assign it to myself.
This is duplicate, and Lars didn't reproduce it, and I wasn't able to reproduce it. Well, I don't know if it's duplicate, but there is another one that is reporting the same, that they are not able to execute some. Yeah, that one.
This one?
Yes. But they only fail with one of the endpoints. I don't know. But Lars was doing a lot of investigation there, and I was trying to reproduce it, and it worked for me. I don't know.
And it works for you.
This has an external cloud provider, and there were bugs with the external language. It was fixing with some other people something with the order of the IPs in the. Yeah, that's one.
Dan, you triage
Yep.
cleared this.
I did. It seemed like that patch was going to solve the issue with addition of some config on the user's part.
Okay.
Maybe that's a wrong assumption.
I didn't look at it. I didn't see this one because it got triage cleared. All right, I'll key this up for me to look at in my after meeting session. That's it for the issues for triage today. Does anybody have any others they wanted to talk about?
The other one that I added to the agenda.
Which one is that?
Proxy flags versus config.
Oh,
I mean, we can put it in a bot that every 1 year open this bug because.
Yeah, I cleared it needs triage on that one too, I think, because we were going to discuss it today and it seemed like a valid bug.
okay.
Well, a valid
right,
issue
well,
we need to address somehow. Either say,
Why don't-
no, we don't support this or whatever. Yeah.
I'll just stop sharing then and I'll let the agenda carry the day.
Yeah, let's just continue with the agenda. So, Antonio, SCTP, too flush or not too flush contract is the first item on the agenda.
Okay, this is one of the things that the theory doesn't match the reality. So I asked one person that is running SCTP and he commented on the issue. And he says that their devices, the stack or something doesn't behave as expected. So that it's better to flush the contract entries. And the last comment in the issue is from one person I was checking, and he's working in some. He's an expert in this area, and he's saying that the protocol says one thing, but the reality is that it never worked well, and better to flush. And so the thing is, I don't know what is the best thing. The other alternative that I was thinking is to have a field in the service port to say graceful shutdown or not, and let the proxy choose the behavior based on the field, because we also had reports of people that want TCP to flash, to not shut down gracefully. And well, that's the current status.
If you want your TCP service to not shut down gracefully, you can just kill it non-gracefully.
Yeah, but this is for the people that have two databases and they have active passive. So they want to move to the passive one just for switching the endpoint, you know. But the active one goes to passive, but is not shut down. So they want the endpoints to do the switchover, forcing the connection close. I have an email in the middle list about it.
Anyone that has active passive can choose to close all the connection. I mean, close all the sockets. Just close, right? And that will then be carried through the session that goes through the load balancer.
Right. If we delete the contract in the middle of a TCP session, will it actually send a reset?
No. I mean, it can never reach the right target, right? Because you're missing the DNAT rules. So it will end up in nowhere.
Well, the question is, does the kernel from the middle send a reset to either end?
If someone tries to hit it, it really depends on your contractor, because from one side you're going to come with a 5-tuple that doesn't include a SYN, and that's going to go in and you're going to check if you have a connection. I mean, a 5-tuple that matches, right? And then it's really if you how you set it up, if you will send a reset or if it just will be dropped in a black hole.
No, or eventually timeout. But I mean, I don't want to.
If the connection is out if there's connection tracker is cleared.
Yeah, the connection is idle and it will time out.
Yeah, on the other side,
right, the client will time out.
It's going to probably give up after a while, time wait or similar.
Yeah, but before we go to the edge cases, so the thing is, we have 3 protocols And we have clear two. We have in one that is TCP, people that wanted to do this flashing. And we have a new protocol that seems something obscure in the internet, that we have some assessment that is better to flash. What do we do? Do we allow people to define the behavior? Do we choose one behavior per protocol? I mean,
my question, I mean, first of all, you know, my bias is to not add API if we can avoid it, right? But it sounds like if we do this shutdown from the middle, for TCP at least, it's not going to be a shutdown. Like the client's not going to get a reset. They're just going to get a timeout. They're going to sit there for hours or days waiting for something to happen.
Yeah.
So that seems like useless to anybody, right?
Absolutely. And if they send, it's going to go into black hole. In best case, they will get a reset back.
Okay, then
it's unspecified really what happens, right? It depends completely on the implementation of the load balance, so to speak. So I don't like that either.
Then one problem solved. We don't add any new thing. So the next problem is what it seems that HTTP in the wild benefits of this behavior, and this is confirmed by large experience and by these people that is running HTTP. What do we do with HTTP now? We keep current behavior, or we change it?
I think we keep it. Do we have? Sorry, I'm refreshing myself on this issue at the same time. It's unclear if this is actually a bug report that says flushing SCTP causes a real problem, or if it's just it's inconsistent and unclear what it's supposed to do. If it's unclear, we can just document it and say, yes, we think SCTP shouldn't need this, but smart people tell us it does, so we're keeping it for now. And then it'll at least be clearly documented.
Yeah, I feel like it's not even totally, like people don't agree or necessarily know what's supposed to be happening in the TCP case. Like, I feel like we should just say, okay, this is what happens when you delete a service. This is what happens when you delete an endpoint. This is what happens when you, and then we can figure out like, okay, is the SCTP case doing the right thing or not? And then we can figure out if we can actually make it do the same thing as TCP. And if we can't, or if it like doesn't work well, then, you know, figure out if we need an exception. I feel like everybody's talking about the details of specific SCTP messages without agreeing on what the goal is.
For SCTP, I don't think it's doing the right thing. The question is it acceptable and is well defined? If we start tinkering with it, what really happens? Will it be well defined after that or not?
But is what well defined? Like, what is the user doing? What is their goal? What is Proxy doing? What is its
goal? No, I agree. I mean, today it's very simple, right? That's sort of, it's timer based.
What's timer based? Like what is the user doing that is timer based?
He doesn't do anything, right? That comes from the implementation of the Proxy.
If the user doesn't do anything, then why is any behavior happening? Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, we're not even we're talking about low level things without agreeing what the high level.
I agree with you on that. I agree. Sort of that specify the behavior and what the added behavior should be is probably the way to go. Today it's more like someone implemented it and that's what we live with.
My question is, people is using it. If the people that is using it say, with this way of working, flashing the entries, it works well. Without flashing the entries, they don't work well. So we are going to break based on what is right.
I seem to remember that if you back up, and Lars can probably correct me, that one of the problems is that people lock the source port when they set up SCTP connections. And that means that if there's no connection tracking and something happens, the timer as it is now, since the UDP base can sit for 30 minutes. So that means that they cannot reconnect. Actually, for every packet they send into the connection tracker, they will just move the point when they can reconnect up. I seem to believe that was part of the problem, that by sort of locking the source port and then going for the same service address with the same port, they keep the timer updated in the contractor, and they can never reconnect.
Yeah, but if you scroll up, one person that is running these devices in production, so it has captures and everything, and says is how the equipment works. The equipment works. I mean, I cannot change that.
Okay.
But I'm just reading the comments. I mean, I'm here as trying to reach a conclusion, because I think that we have two options today: keep the current behavior or change it.
So just to echo maybe what Dan was saying, we've never really written down what we think the semantic should be when you delete a service with respect to open connections, right? Or honestly, we've never really written it down for when an endpoint goes away either.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And there's a question, I swear I saw it in one of the bugs this morning, but I can't find it, of are those actually the same semantic or are they different things?
I think they're different. Because when an endpoint goes away, you can still have active endpoints there. So, I mean, if you just look at the UDP case, where someone has, basically, if someone has locked the source port, which I think we all agree is a bad behavior, but it is permitted. And when you do that, and the other endpoint goes away, you cannot reestablish a session, because the connection tracker keeps remembering this, and for every packet, it will update the counter and it will send the packet to the endpoint that doesn't exist anymore. If you're unlucky, if you don't clean it up properly in the connection tracker. So they really need to make sure that everything gets cleaned up in the connection tracker. Then they should at least be able to reestablish. And I think that's one of the key things to get this to work properly, and have that well defined and have it implemented everywhere. It should. And for TCP, right, the connection stays after the endpoint goes away, and the connection tracking takes it away after a while, based on the session state.
There is an example in this issue a bit further up on TCP, where they actually use to set the endpoint not ready when it's the thread pool has run out. And when they have threads, they set it to ready again and expect the endpoints to be reestablished. But all existing connections should work whenever the endpoint is taken away or not. It was quite interesting use case. It will not work on IPVS, but it will work on IP tables proxy mode.
And Lars, the comment that I read, but I can't find anywhere, I'm pretty sure was you asking, when we delete the service, not just an endpoint, but when we delete the whole service, do we really need that to be graceful?
Yeah, that's in the top of this thread.
Is that in this one?
Yeah, it's the second or the third comment.
Let me ask everybody a question. What happens when you go to your firewalls today and add a rule to block?
Yeah,
I don't know, to block incoming port 80. Do you expect it to gradually allow it, or to just block everything?
Block.
Yeah. Let me ask another question. If you go to your load balancers today and remove the load balancing rule, what happens to the subsequent packets once the rule is in the system?
In the proxy, you keep the connection.
We used to have it as a policy that if you establish connections.
Hold on. Let's use proper load balancers, right? Let's use commercial grade, if you will, like stuff that people
built two.
Yeah.
And it was a policy that you could put.
What I'm trying to say is, the assumption that everyone is making is people do that because they are trying to gracefully shut down things. But an argument can be made, people do that because they want to kill everything, either because they are under attack or something majorly wrong and they want to immediately lock everything. So intent matter, right? I am trying to drive the discussion to the higher level. We have to sit down and discuss the intent and make sure that once the intent is set, then the implementation is easy to follow. But right now, we're singularly looking from one point, which is, should we allow graceful or should we not allow graceful?
But, so what you're saying is on the service in reality, should we have a grace? I mean, delete is pretty brutal, but should you have an admin state in reality? Or where you bring it down? I mean, you lock it and there will be a graceful period. I mean, is that the type of behavior we should have? Yeah.
I don't know about the type of behavior we should have.
No, I agree.
All I know is there are few assumptions being set, right? That people want graceful or don't want, and I'm telling you, I know for a fact that people.
It's easy to argue from either point, right?
Yeah. There are people who would come and tell you, no, I don't want grace. I am in trouble. I want to get out of the trouble, and I want to tear down everything. Right? And by the way, even with HA proxy, if you remove the rule, tough luck. It's really tough luck.
I believe most agree that if you remove the service, you can kill everything without mercy. But if you remove one endpoint, that is a little bit a different problem.
That's exactly.
Yeah, I was talking about endpoint.
Yeah. For what it's worth, one of the biggest shortcomings in services infrastructure right now is active passive. We don't have a prescribed approach in the API or the stack for people to do active passive. People do get around that with two services, endpoint and ready. They use ready, not ready state. They use custom endpoints and then they play around with ready, not ready to route the traffic to active and passive with an external watchdog. So there are a lot of topics mashed up in this discussion.
So just for the sake of time, maybe the thing to do to move forward is actually just write a little bit on what the clean slate assumptions should have been and see if there's a way to drive towards those. I'm afraid that the things that people might have naturally expected will be breaking changes, but we can look at those individually. And specifically the edges I would be interested in here are an endpoint is terminating. Well, an endpoint becomes unready, an endpoint becomes terminating. An endpoint is removed entirely from the endpoint set. The service is deleted but not gone, like it has a finalizer or something, and the service is gone. Those are all interesting and potentially different edges, right?
Basically define the life cycle of the...
Yeah. We've never really written that state machine out.
Yeah. I mean, that's what that machine needed.
With traffic,
right.
with impact on new and existing traffic. Not just what happens to rules and proxies and tables and whatever.
I'll capture a couple of thoughts from this discussion at the end of this issue. Maybe we should move on to the next item, which I think is Antonio again.
Yeah, but I think that this has less.
Will you add it in the issue or in the link in the agenda? Yes, I know where to look.
Oh, I was going to capture it in the issue. I was just going to go straight to the end of 108.523 and just
okay, excellent.
Write out what I just said, more or less.
Okay. Next item is about kubeproxy. There is one issue report by one person. So the person wants to configure the health and the metrics, want to bind the health and the metrics address to the node IP. The problem is that there is the flags are overridden by the config, so it picks the default addresses. And he argues that those addresses are per node, so the flag should override the config the same way that the host name override flag overrides the config. And that's the problem statement.
So I remember discussing this a very long time ago, before the component base program even kicked off, before it died. And I remember making the same argument, but there were reasons which I cannot recall now why that represented a break for some cases. Maybe we're past that now. Like maybe we've had config files around for long enough that we can actually make this argument. Because I agree, the semantics should be flags override config. Whoever is asking if they're sharing their screen, no, nobody's sharing screen.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Zoom's being weird to me.
The flags versus config, Jay and other person tried to, they put a cap, and Jordan complained because kubelet, I don't know, he was sharing some experience that that the flag versus config was problematic, and that got stuck. But the thing here is that the host name is clearly that has to override the config because it's per node. And the point of this person, and I agree with him, is that the bind address has to be always per node. I mean, it's not that you can configure an IP for every node in a configuration file. Because mainly this is used mainly with config maps. So there is no way to have a config map per node. So I don't know if we want to do this exception for these flags of.
Well, so for a lot of the flags that involve bind ports, we take a CIDR, right? And we say we'll bind to any host, any interface on the host that has this address, that has an address in this CIDR, so that you can take a single config and feed it to your whole cluster, right?
I don't think that's true of kube proxy. That may be true of other components.
Okay, it may. Consistency was never our strong suit.
I mean, also that presumes that your entire cluster is going to be, I mean, in the same subnet, right? Which is generally the case, but may not be.
I think in other places we actually take a list of CIDRs, so you can
Okay.
give it a set of, 10.8/192/16, and then all your interfaces would be bound, but not localhost.
And also don't forget v6, I mean, dual stack.
Yeah.
So is our action item for this to figure out whether kube proxy supports that? And if not, make it support that?
Well, and I mean, I think the question here is, should the flags override the configs? And
Not all the flags, just these two.
well,
Yeah,
I mean, I think in general, sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the user only cared about being able to bind the kube proxy metrics to a specific IP address or a specific NIC on the host and not others, because they didn't want to expose that to other traffic. And so if we want to solve this particular issue, giving some way in the config map, if that's what we think the best option or the most general option is, to address that particular case, I think would be fine. If we want to have a larger discussion about whether config options on the command line override the config map, maybe that's a second larger discussion.
Yeah, that's right. So the problem is that how an user can bind kube proxy addresses per node. Because if you see the issue and you see his manifest, it's pretty clear from there what he's trying to do. That's why I bring this up, because I think that is a very legit request.
Well, the example of the hostname override, like it's named override, so it seems pretty clear, although it didn't really mean override the config file, but it, still sounds like it was meant that way. Do we need a net new parameter here that is the bind override, which we can then say this isn't even in the config file? Like if you specify it as a flag, it will trump over the config file. Here's my big concern. This area is like dusty and sort of got abandoned by the people who were working on generalizing it. And there was a lot of subtlety there, like a surprising amount of subtlety. And I'm wary of going off and doing our own thing without understanding what that subtlety was.
Yeah, that's also my concern, because the config is complex. And the logic is complex. So,
I mean,
Wow.
sadly, like it really shouldn't need to be this complex, but this is where we ended up. I would be personally like, I'd be okay adding a net new parameter if we need to, or making the bind be a CIDR, an IP or CIDR. If it's a CIDR, then like use that. Like, does that satisfy the requirement? We have to manually parse it. Well,
Put a CIDR on bind, right? The program becomes pretty complex, and you need to calculate the different
Yes.
addresses that are in there and bind to. And if you do that in V6, you might create, if someone is not careful, I mean, you put the /62 as your CIDR, then you have a lot of bits. Someone does it by mistake, right? You have 66 bits then that you need to loop over and create each address. So I think CIDRs are dangerous.
would those addresses aren't specifically bound to local interfaces though, right? I guess they,
Oh, you mean that you would, well, so if well, I'm thinking that when you do the bind, right, you need to give an address that needs to be a /32/ or a /128. So if you give a CIDR or you accept, then someone will have to bind, do individual binds, right?
that it's right. When you have
the
more,
best would be to use something like eBPF here, just have people bind to
No,
zero.
no. It means you find the single node IP that fits into that
Then I
CIDR.
agree. If it's one address v4, one address v6, standard, perfect. Or even if you give a list, right? So it's enumerate a number of addresses. But if you start using CIDRs, then it will be horrible.
the logic with the CIDRs is here's a range. Look at all the addresses bound to all the interfaces on this machine, right? So that's not the full /64.
Okay.
It's
You map.
you intersect those.
Okay. Yeah.
And then
Okay.
bind on the intersection. It's still more than one, right?
I mean,
Which
that's
is still
fine.
unpleasant.
That is fair to do an intersection. That I can agree with. Yeah.
What about external IPs? We've had some issues where administrators chose external IPs that were within the node's subnet. In this case, would there be a way to exclude that external IP from this list? It doesn't seem like it. We think that's silly, but they have done it, and somehow we don't prevent that.
I mean, I guess at that point you can't express what you want in a CIDR, and therefore you can't have it.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Just say that you always do a intersection. Then you end up with an empty set, right? And
I mean, well,
we do this intersection in other components. I forget exactly which one, but I know we do it.
it's a good practice.
I mean, it seems like this is the way forward to at least figure out whether we do this already. And if not, at least be consistent with other components. Is that accurate? I added some notes to that effect in the doc.
Yeah.
All right. And in the interest of time, we should continue because there's a bunch more agenda that got added after
Oh, cool.
previous discussions.
Antonio, is that enough to carry forward?
No.
That's what I thought.
I don't know. I'm going to assign to you.
Well,
no, I mean, it's I don't know.
Yeah, let's take it off and discuss how we can crack through this. Like I don't have the specifics in front of me here, so let's take it to Slack or something.
Okay.
Okay. Next one, Andrew. proxy terminating endpoints.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about what we're going to do for proxy terminating endpoints for 124, which kind of overlaps with the first topic. So when we merged the KEP, we kind of said we're going to apply the fallback policy to external and internal, as well as when the policy is cluster. And I know some people kind of disagreed, or like they weren't sure if that's the right approach. And basically we said, we'll write the code in the PR and then talk about it then. So I have a PR open that does implement the fallback policy for all the cases really. And wanted to open up discussion to see if we're still okay with that, or if we have an argument for just keeping it to local or something else.
So I've added a comment to that PR since the meeting started, summarizing the previous discussion, which I found in an earlier PR. But basically, my argument was that proxy terminating endpoints exist for local for a very specific reason, to avert a certain race case. And that argument doesn't apply at all to the cluster case. And then Tim's argument was, it's simpler and easier to document if we just do the same for all of them, which is true. And Tim mostly argued against my argument that there are possible, like, people could lose traffic or whatever in the if we suddenly add this semantic. So I guess I don't really object.
Yeah, like the biggest convincing point for me is that it can't be worse than, like, this is something that Tim mentioned in another thread, but like it can't be worse than dropping it. Like, even if it seems unlikely or not used as much, like worst case scenario is that it's better than what we already had. So I tend to agree. Okay, cool. Thanks. I'll please review the PR and take it from there.
All right. Bridget, you're up. Route controller node IPs.
Awesome, thank you. So this one should be pretty quick. It's just a question of, hey, this has been there for a long time. And I pinged Andrew Sycam and said, is this something we can just, is this a fix for a bug and it's unambiguous? And he said, remember we were discussing this last time, exactly what happens when node IPs changed. And I said, darn, okay, I got to bring this to SIG network to make sure we aren't going to mess something up big time. And Andrew, I don't know if you want to add any more flavor or context around that, but.
Yeah, like my take on this was the route controller change that we make should be aligned with what we do when a host network pod, like if a node IP changes, do we change the pod IP status of a host network pod? And if we do, then I think route controller should also accept node IP changes. But if we don't change the status of host network pods, then I think route controller should do the same thing.
Is this a live change on the node? Like, is this the node changes IP while it's running, or is this node changes IP after it reboots?
My understanding is it could be both. Like if you do a reboot, but the node isn't deleted or recreated with the same name, then it from Kubernetes standpoint, it's the same kubelet. So
both, both they have different impact. Rebooting will fix the pods, but it will never fix the routes.
Right. That's what I'm trying to get at was, to Andrew's question, if the node reboots, then kubelet should update the IP address in all host network pods, right?
Yeah, and that works today.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, there is no disagreements there, but the route controller does not do anything because it does not watch updated nodes, as far as I remember.
Got it.
Changing the node live. I mean, any SNAT you have going out will, of course, not work any longer.
There is a PR that tries to fix the host IPs, host pod IPs, but it's stuck until we figure out the entire story. Yeah. That's a good point, Andrew, because I didn't consider route controller when I was thinking about these things.
Yeah, I think Bowie has a good point that if we have an inconsistency here, then we should fix it one direction or the other. I mean, I think we all agree with that. I just don't know what the right direction to fix it is.
We can always say, don't do that. And if you want to change that node IP, restart it and recreate the object. But I don't think that's fair to users, but it's possible. That's what we do today.
What are the use cases today? Maybe I'm just bad memory, but what are the use cases today for changing the node IP? Like,
it doesn't happen in cloud often.
Yeah, of course.
Right. Where it happens is on either bare metal or private clouds, like ESX environments and so on. They tend to have that, and even the person who submitted the issues that triggered host network pod IPs, I asked point blank, like, where is that? Because I haven't seen it in cloud. It's like yeah, it's bare metal stuff.
But if you had a server, sorry, Per, go ahead.
I was going to say, typically, I mean, I work only with bare metal, right? And we have another way to solve it. Typically, it is because someone changes the network CIDR that you're on, and that your attachment point has been your node address. And then it changes and you have to change. Our way of solving it is to always use a loopback type of address for the node address, and then always route all the traffic. So I don't care what the address is used on the physical sort of interfaces. And by that, I don't have to change node address, but it typically is that the network team says that, oh, we're changing this network, be that management or anything, and that's what you have had as your node address. And you want to do this live, so you want to update it. That's the typical use case.
But if you were running like a server internal to your company that people were using, like, wouldn't doing this cause all sorts of havoc?
I would believe so, yes.
Then if you're trying to land that this is part of a bigger operation anyway and should be kept manual, and instead of overcomplicating things, that position I can support actually.
That's exactly why we come to the conclusion that the only way is to keep a stable address inside, and then you route the traffic to the nodes, and then you can do whatever changes you want on those networks. You just add in the new routes, and that's it. So
go ahead.
Sorry, some echo. So to Tim's point, like in the typical case, like I guess like you would just slap a DNS server or DNS for that, but like with the route controller, like it doesn't support like it needs like an actual IP, which is where like the specific problem comes up. Like, is there a way to like maybe we can update route controller to use like the internal DNS from node status? Like, I don't know how feasible that is.
It's been a very, very long time since I looked inside that code. So I can't say how feasible it would be.
I'm also happy to leave this in people's minds. Let us go on to the next topic and I can bring it up next time because I don't think we're going to get a change this big in before code freeze this time, which is fine. But we just do want to make sure this is still on the radar.
All right. Thanks, Bridget. Rob, you got the next two.
Cool. Yeah, I think both of mine are pretty quick. For those of you following Gateway API, we released V1 Alpha 2 last year now. We're finally getting into that final stretch where we're feeling confident enough to get to beta. I think we've hit basically all of our release criteria now. What we're proposing is a beta that includes gateway class, and HTTP route. There are other resources in the API that we're planning to leave at alpha because they don't have the same level of stability that these core resources have. I can get into more details at a later point, but I just want to have people aware that we are, in the final weeks before beta release. So we'll be reaching out to the same SIG network API reviewers. I know code freeze is coming up, so recognize it's a busy time, but the API we're proposing to graduate to beta is nearly identical to the V1 Alpha 2 API. We've had broad implementation at this point from lots of different projects, which is great. And so far feedback has been promising. So just keep an eye out for that. We have weekly meetings on Mondays. So if you're interested in being a part of that, definitely come join us. As we know, APIs last for a really long time. And in Kubernetes, when we get to beta, those APIs last for a really long time. So if you can help us find any mistakes along the way, that would be great before we get to beta. Yeah, that's Gateway API.
And the best way to find API mistakes is just to try to use it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Try to do some crazy thing with it, see where the boundaries are, and realize that something doesn't express well.
Yeah, well said. And we've got an implementations page. I lost track. I think we have somewhere between 5 and 8 implementations right now of the API. So feel free to play around and tell us what you find. Yeah. The other item I had was just a follow-up that I think others had raised this issue, and that's updating our SIG network meeting time. Someone had asked it in SIG network Slack yesterday or today. I don't really have much context here other than it sounded like we had been leaning towards 11 a.m. Pacific on Wednesdays, and then it kind of got stuck, but I don't remember.
I let it fall off my plate.
Okay.
Yes, I think you are right. There was some question about whether it was better at like 9 a.m. or 11 a.m. But the truth is, given that we have folks here from the US, from South America, from Europe, and folks who would like to attend from Asia, there is no perfect time zone that's going to work for everybody. So we can either do like some of the other SIGs and alternate and make it sort of clumsy for some people every other week and awkward for the rest of us every week, or just apologize to whatever our smallest constituency is.
And you
So
were
it's-
saying 11 a.m. Pacific
I thought
or
that
9 a.m. Please don't make it 9 a.m. Pacific on Wednesdays, because SIG Cloud Provider just moved their meeting to that.
Okay.
There are at least SIG auth and maybe other SIGs at 11 a.m. on Wednesday. So we wouldn't be the first SIG at that time, but maybe that means it's a time that works because someone else is doing it.
I mean,
Andrew
every
Sykim
SIG,
and I both need to go to SIG Cloud Provider. So
yeah,
that's what
But I
every,
think we
every
can-
SIG has, they all have the same problem.
But we can just offset like with cloud provider SIG and just, that would fix the problem.
Go to every alt week. Yeah. Okay, I'll put it back on my plate. I forgot. I wrote a sticky note and stuck it on my screen, so now I won't forget it until it falls off again.
Yeah, another option is to keep the SIG network meeting and have an office hours in another time. I mean, I can host it in my time that is good for ACI and US because it has overlap. And we can try that and bring the topics there. I don't know.
How has office hours worked for other SIGs? I don't know.
But at least you can say, well, we're not going to make it because we did office hours and we were only 2 persons during 1 month.
Okay, I mean, I'm not saying no. I just don't want to waste anybody's time.
My concern is we should. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that we tried this with gateway APIs where we had office hours, and the office hours just turned into yet another meeting. I just wanted to just shoot that out there.
Yeah, so we tried that. We've tried lots of things with Gateway API. We did try the alternating meeting times. One time that was Europe friendly, and then the next week would be Asia friendly, basically, times. And in the case of Gateway API, we ended up with meeting time that is more APAC friendly than Europe friendly, just because the number of people attending our Europe friendly time slot was just a subset of who was attending the APAC friendly slot. But I know it just depends on who's interested in the project. And this is a broader group than just Gateway API. but we have tried and it worked for a while. I don't know.
All right, I'll try to revive that thread. Although honestly, maybe it'll be after code freeze.
All right, thanks, Tim. And Andrew has a.
Yeah, I don't want to
Yeah,
take
go
up
ahead.
a ton of time. Just want to poke for review on the AMP API PR. I guess code freeze is probably more important because this isn't affected necessarily by code freeze. So I get if some people are putting it off, but just want to keep poking it so we can keep momentum there. KCD gave a really good review, so thanks to him for that so far. Otherwise, we haven't had anything else. So, yep, that's all I had. Thank you.
You're definitely on my list, but you nailed it. You're a little further down than the rest of the code reviews.
Yeah, no, totally understandable. Just want to keep it there so that it doesn't get lost.
What is the list of priorities for code freeze? Who has PRs? I have one. I'm going to use the opportunity. I have one PR that needs review.
Can you
Well,
paste that in the doc, or do we have a better tracker?
No, I just because Andy was saying that. I mean, it's 2 weeks for code freeze, and that means next week for by shedding, and last week to rush the comments and get it merged. So I just wanted.
Yeah, I'm gonna try not to let it all sit until the last second. So most of my time for the rest of next week and until code freeze will be spent on this. I've got about 40 PRs assigned to me, although some of those are like long-term stale. So it's probably on the order of 30 that are assigned to me. I expect that to go up before it goes down.
And Andrews and Dan Winship PR are for code freeze. Because those are quite complex. The internal external. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Those are the ones that I need to make a big block of time for.
Yeah, that's the thing. And there are anything else besides those Andrews and the one from pod IPs or host IPs from someone from China. Is this for this? That is.
It is, but it's not a complicated one, right?
It had something with the APIs, but I don't know. And who else is? Do we have more things? The Dan Winship's the Q proxy local interface or something. I think that's almost done.
Q proxy local interface
from Surgeon. Yes.
Oh yeah, she's on vacation, but that will merge when she gets back probably.
Okay, I'm gonna try to batch the way I'm doing reviews, and so like get all the Q proxy ones at the same time. It's more for me than for anybody else, but if you see them all coming up in a batch, that's why.
And there is no other graduation or something like that for endpoints or topology, all these things, Rob? This is not for this release, right?
So I did make a mistake for topology where I forgot to switch the default on in 123. So it went to beta and wasn't default on. So that's changing in 124, but otherwise I don't think anything else is changing for this cycle.
Okay, so
that I'm involved with.
This is the internal external traffic policy release.
Yeah.
It's going to be worse than the dual stack thing.
You mean better than?
Are you using dual stack right now as the worst thing you have dealt with?
Well, somebody pinged me today about the dual stack that they were doing 120 and saying don't do carry patches that because in 123 you have 79 commits from teams. The guy was freaking out.
All right. I'll follow up on these issues after my last meeting.
All right. And we're done. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Yeah, guys.